Never asked you to do this before, but I will try now. There is a thanks button. I'd love to buy the team who help us here a coffee. That's what the thanks button for. It's not called buy me a coffee, it's called press the button at some stage and help the team. The more you help us, the more we can get clips and videos out as we head into election 24. That being said, we're now going to do a comparison. Are you going for Marjorie Taylor Greene or AOC? Hands up straight. I will always put AOC, but we'll do the comparison and you can decide yourself.
Women like me aren't supposed to run for office. I wasn't born to a wealthy or powerful family. Mother from Puerto Rico.
Open borders, the Green New Deal, and socialism. Democrats fight for their socialist agenda every single day. I'll fight even harder to stop them. I'm Marjorie Greene, Republican for Congress.
Mr. Bobulinski, I heard your opening statement. It's submitted to the record, part of our proceedings. I have a quick question. Simple. Is it your testimony today that you personally witnessed President Joe Biden commit a crime?
I believe the fact that he was sitting with me while I was putting together a business
deal. Did you
deal,
witness the president commit a crime? Is it your testimony today?
Yes.
And what crime have you witnessed?
How much time do I have to go through it?
It is simple. You name the crime. Did you watch him steal something?
Corruption statutes, RICO and conspiracy.
What is it? What is the crime, sir? Specifically.
You asked me to answer the question. I answered the question.
No.
RICO, you're obviously not familiar with. Corruption
Excuse
statutes.
me, sir. Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir. RICO is not a crime. It is a category. What is the crime?
It's a category of crimes that you're then charged
You
under
have charges.
a long 100
You
list
have
of
charges.
statutes.
Sir,
You
please
want me to name the exact statute under RICO?
Yes.
Well, it's funny. In this committee room, everyone's not here. There's over 18
All right, sir, I reclaim my
lawyers
time.
that went to law school.
I
I'll leave
reclaim
it
my
up to
time.
you guys
Okay,
to
thank
define
you,
the
sir. I
statute
reclaim my
under
time.
RICO.
Clearly, what we are seeing here today is a continuation of the 15-month saga of the Republican majority lost in the desert. Impeachment 101. The majority party, or whomever is raising impeachment, must accuse the president of a high crime, a specific high crime or misdemeanor. I would like to submit to the record HRES 918, the House resolution to open this impeachment inquiry.
Without objection to order.
This resolution does not outline a high crime or misdemeanor. It's not here. Now, when we compare the chairman's opening from his previous opening, he's talking about Ukraine and Burisma and all of this. This entire inquiry is based on a blockbuster piece of information that was in a classified SCIF room. And inside that room was a document alleging President Biden directly of a $10 million bribery scheme, a $10 million bribery scheme, extremely serious. What happened? What happened a month ago, Mr. Chairman? That document, the FBI arrested the person who offered those allegations for falsifying his testimony to the FBI. This entire impeachment inquiry is based on an actual, provable individual who has lied. Now, responsible leadership would withdraw an inquiry based on that. Withdraw it. Instead, what we are seeing is that this committee was warned about the falsehoods of these allegations long before that, warned by Trump's Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and yet they proceeded anyway. The chairman proceeded anyway. This committee was warned by Rudy Giuliani associate right here, Lev Parnas, after that document about the falsehoods of this. Then held hearings where your own expert witnesses said that there was no grounds for impeachment, and you proceeded anyway. And finally, as if none of this was enough, the FBI arrested the individual who was the source of the entire, to quote the chairman, heart of the matter, to launch this impeachment inquiry, and proceeded anyway. At this point, the story is not the fact that the basis of this impeachment inquiry is wrong. The story is why it's proceeding anyway. Why is this committee proceeding based on false charges? And by the way, no charges. I have yet to hear in the chairman's opening the allegation that they are specifically charging the President of the United States with. I'm hearing about Biden family. I'm hearing about this and that. I am not hearing the specific allegation by this committee. What is it? It's not here, and that is the problem. The story is when this committee knew that they were working with falsified evidence. That's the story. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I would like to announce that I am reintroducing my bill, the Protect Children's Innocence Act. This bill will stop gender-affirming care on children. It will protect children from the heinous and evil ideology that is grooming kids and making a profit off of horrific surgeries that mutilate their genitals, give them life-altering medications like puberty blockers, hormone therapy, that will have permanent damage to their bodies for the rest of their life. Before these kids are even grown up, before they've graduated from high school, before they're old enough to vote, before they're old enough to get a tattoo, ink on their own skin, before they're old enough to join the military, before they're old enough to make adult decisions. This is an important bill that Congress must pass. My bill will charge any person who knowingly performs gender-affirming care on a minor with a Class C felony. It will prohibit all taxpayer-funded gender-affirming care. It will prohibit institutions or higher education from providing instruction on gender-affirming care. There's nothing affirming about lying to children that they can change their gender, because you cannot change your gender. My bill will deem aliens who are determined to have performed gender-affirming care on a minor as ineligible to receive visas or be admitted into the United States. We need to take a strong stand in the United States of America that we do not abuse our children or sexualize them in any way. This is an important bill that must be passed, and I'll give you some examples. In 2021, there was a father in Texas who lost custody of his twin 7-year-old sons because he attempted to stop one of the boys from transitioning his gender. The mother began transitioning the boy when he was only 2 years old, and then tried to enroll him in a pediatric gender clinic at age 5. This child, this young boy, needs to be protected, and his father has the rights to do it. But they didn't give him his rights. Last summer, Boston Children's Hospital released videos promoting gender dysphoria and offering sterilization, castration, and mutilation of children. These videos not only explained its genital mutilation surgeries, but they were also promoting these surgeries to kids and their parents. By the way, this is for profit. Also, just recently, Jamie Reed, who worked at one of more than 100 pediatric gender clinics across the United States, publicly came out to discuss the atrocities happening to children at these gender clinics. When a female takes testosterone, the profound and permanent effects of the hormone can be seen in a matter of months. Voices drop, beards sprout, body fat is redistributed, sexual interest explodes, aggression increases, and mood can be unpredictable. One of the side effects includes sterility. As a matter of fact, after only 4 to 5 years of taking testosterone, there have been many young women under the age of 18 that have had to have hysterectomies because of the damage done inside of them. But even more horrific is the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, signed a bill into law to provide refuge for trans kids and their families. This bill will protect trans kids and their families that flee to California from states like Alabama, Texas, or Idaho, or any other state that criminalizing the parents of trans kids for allowing them to receive gender-affirming care. My bill will protect these children and stop a state like California and the monsters and the groomers and the child predators in that state that look to damage them before they ever grow up. There are many states that are working hard to protect kids, but we don't have enough states doing it. And that's why it's the responsibility of Republicans in Congress to protect children. This is imperative. We know what the left is trying to do, and we should have listened to them when they told us. Remember the San Francisco Men's Choir actually singing a song announcing that they're coming for our children? That's a threat that we should not ignore. We've had enough with drag queen shows in elementary schools and middle schools and high schools. We've had enough of drag queens gyrating in front of children in the public square. These groomers and child predators must be stopped because they're sexualizing children for profit in a multi-billion-dollar medical industry that looks to grow and grow. Something must be done to protect the sacred identity of children, because God made children. God made all of us, male and female. In his image, he made us. And God doesn't make mistakes. I urge every single Republican and members of Congress to co-sponsor my bill, and we must get it passed. This isn't just a Republican issue. This is an issue across.
Mr. Speaker, I know a man, a decent man, who said that preventing genocide is an achievable goal, a goal that requires a level of government organization and engagement that matches in its intensity the brutality and efficiency required to carry out mass killing. Too often, these efforts have come too late, after the best and least costly opportunities to prevent them have been missed. The man that said that was then Vice President and now President Joseph Biden. And he was right. Mr. Speaker, I rise to say that such a time is now. As we speak, in this moment, 1.1 million innocents in Gaza are at famine's door. A famine that is being intentionally precipitated through the blocking of food and global humanitarian assistance by leaders in the Israeli government. This is a mass starvation of people, engineered and orchestrated, following the killing of another 30,000, 70% of whom were women and children killed. There is hardly a single hospital left. And this was all accomplished, much of this accomplished with U.S. resources and weapons. If you want to know what an unfolding genocide looks like, open your eyes. It looks like the forced famine of 1.1 million innocents. It looks like thousands of children eating grass as their bodies consume themselves while trucks of food are slowed and halted just miles away. It looks like good and decent people who do nothing, or too little, too late. It is against United States law to provide weapons to forces who block United States humanitarian assistance. And that is exactly what is happening right now. So much so that the president himself stated during the State of the Union that the United States must and will be building its own port to let aid through. It will be too late. The time is now to force compliance with U.S. law and the standards of humanity and fulfill our obligations to the American people to suspend the transfer of U.S. weapons to the Israeli government in order to stop and prevent further atrocity. Honoring our alliances does not mean facilitating mass killing. We cannot hide from our responsibility any longer. Blocking assistance from one's closest allies to starve 1 million people is not unintentional. We have a responsibility to prove the value of global democracy, enshrined in the upholding of civil society, rule of law, and commitment to human and civil rights. This is not just about Israel or Gaza. This is about us. The world will never be the same, and we will never be the same. And we must write our story in this moment of what it means and who we are as Americans. And our story must be not that we were good men who did nothing, but that we were a committed democracy that did something. And we must prove that now. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
From Georgia, Ms. Green.
The gentlewoman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this resolution. Being a mother is the greatest gift in the world, and childbirth is a true miracle of God. In 2019, pregnancy centers served roughly 2 million women, men, and youth. They provided services such as medical care, education, mentoring, and material support like diapers, car seats, and clothing. From 2016 through 2020, pro-life pregnancy centers partnered with pregnant women at risk for abortion to save over 800,000 lives. Approximately 75% of women at risk for abortion who view an ultrasound of their baby in the womb at a pregnancy center ultimately make the choice to continue their pregnancy. Merrick Garland calls parents who want to protect their kids from sexual indoctrination in schools domestic terrorists, but refuses to protect facilities that help pregnant women carry their babies from being attacked by far-left extremists. Since the Dobbs decision was leaked in May 2022 alone, approximately 40 churches and 60 pro-life pregnancy centers have been firebombed and vandalized across the country by pro-murder extremists. The range of cost of damages for each attack ranges from less than $100 to more than $250,000. Shameful. Some of the things they have said, they've spray painted on a church in Lansing, Michigan, abort the court, and death to Christian nationalism. Death for Christians that care about our country? I don't think so. They also caused $50,000 in damages in Bethesda, Maryland, setting fire to 3 churches. It's shameful. Jane's Revenge, which is a terrorist group, said if abortion isn't safe, neither are you. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this resolution.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
I have an amendment at the desk, number 2, printed in the congressional record.
The clerk will designate the amendment, and a point of order is reserved.
A congressional record offered by Mrs. Green of Georgia.
The gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. Taylor Greene, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, before I discuss the details of my amendment, I want to applaud the new Republican majority for giving members the opportunity to offer amendments in a more open process. The People's House has been broken for far too long, and I look forward to working with my colleagues in an open process for the remainder of this Congress. I also want to thank Chairman McMorris Rodgers for her leadership on this issue to put American energy first. I co-sponsored this legislation because I believe it puts America back on track to regain energy independence. This is such an important issue and critical piece of legislation that I believe we cannot stop short. We need to chart a path back to energy independence and ensure President Biden is not able to sell our critical oil supplies to China or any other rogue nations. President Biden used emergency authorities to sell hundreds of millions of barrels of oil to our enemies. My amendment would prevent President Biden from claiming an emergency to further reduce our strategic oil supplies. This is why I filed impeachment articles last Congress against President Biden on the grounds that he endangered, compromised, and undermined the energy security of the United States by selling oil from the United States Strategic Petroleum Reserve to foreign nations. President Biden has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to the national security of our country. No president in the history of the United States has ordered a liquidation of the SPR on this scale. He sold 40% of our critical oil supply to trick and deceive the American people before the election. Rather than unleashing American energy here at home, he has robbed our country. While President Biden took office in 2021, the SPR contained 638 million barrels of oil. Since then, he has slashed our oil inventory to 371 million barrels. He has decimated the SPR to the lowest level since December 1983, before some members of this body were even born. He shredded the offers from oil companies to resupply the reserve. He gave away 7 million barrels of oil to a communist Chinese state-run energy firm. The CCP had 1.2 billion barrels when Biden took office. They have even more now. Cannot believe our president did that. If we let President Biden continue to run our oil this way, we will have nothing left. This has destroyed America's oil production. President Biden shut down the Keystone XL pipeline, destroying hundreds of thousands of American jobs. President Biden has allowed the least amount of federal land for drilling since the end of World War II. We are now producing 1 million barrels of oil less every day compared to when President Trump was in office. Every country faces national disasters. Where will we get our oil next time we are in crisis? Who will we have to beg to get our oil? China? Iran? The Saudis? Venezuela, like the Biden administration has already done? Or maybe even Russia? President Biden's actions prove an intentional plot to destroy America's oil industry and usher in the climate cult's Green New Deal. My amendment would simply strike the exceptions that Biden used to sell our oil. The American people don't believe that the president should have the authority to declare an emergency for any reason and then sell our oil to our enemies. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, and I yield back.
What do you say to an independent voter or an average voter who looks at what's going on with Donald Trump? You have his assets might be seized tomorrow. You also have the hush money case from the the district attorney, Alvin Bragg of New York. You also have the Georgia case about election interference. You also have the special counsel investigation on election interference. You also have the classified documents case down in Florida. That's 5 cases. And to a voter, what do you say to a voter who says, well, that doesn't look like he's being treated equally before the law? That looks like somebody that the government is going after.
Has there ever been a president, Republican or Democrat, that has been subject to this level of criminal charges, indictments, and investigations? This is not about party. This is not about politics. This is about corruption and criminality. We're talking about an individual who ordered essentially a terrorist attack on the Capitol of the United States in order to retain power. That is not about being a Republican. It is not about being a Democrat. It's about being an unethical and individual who is subject and prone to criminality. And unfortunately, this is the state that we're in. And I actually think that the fact that it's happening in so many places and so many jurisdictions cuts in the face of that. This is not just New York. This is Georgia. This is federal courts as well.
I want to follow up and say, Maria, the more times they indict President Trump, the more people realize that the Biden administration is a communist regime. And for the first time, Americans are actually seeing what communism really looks like. And we have to stand up to this. This is why Republicans in the House, when we come back in September, we have to vote for an impeachment inquiry because it's the right thing to do. Whether Joe Biden took $5 to his name for corrupt business deals or whether he took $40 million, it does not matter. It's up to Republicans to do the right thing and not allow the Department of Justice to win the 2024 presidential election for Joe Biden. And I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's really interesting to hear the gentlelady from Georgia speak about Hunter Biden leaving. And she is the person that showed nude photos of Hunter Biden in this very committee room, showing dick pics in this committee room of Hunter Biden. I have my 5 minutes, gentlelady. And so I think it's really ironic, hypocritical, quite shameful that the person is complaining about somebody leaving when she's showing nude photos of him to this committee, showing nude photos of him to this committee in this very room. And you also talk about decorum. You're talking about January 6th. Ms. Green, I was there with you when we went to the January 6th jail, and when you were hugging, high-fiving, talking to, and providing so much comfort and joy to the insurrectionists that attacked our Capitol. And you were insurrectionists that attacked our Capitol. You were hugging and giving them all the support.
Mr. Chairman, the gentleman has the time.
Stop the clock. Chair recognizes Mr. Garcia.
I'd like to continue my
3 minutes and 50 seconds.
My 5 minutes. And I just want to remind everyone, that this is, again, about the Donald Trump revenge show. We're here today, and the majority is doing this hearing because this is all about Donald Trump and trying to make sure they do everything they can to support him. For weeks, we as Democrats and Republicans and the chairman demanded a public hearing, and I agree with Mr. Moskowitz. Yet, Mr. Chairman, you have denied it. We want a public hearing. If we need to take a vote or ask unanimous consent, we should hear from Mr. Biden today. That's what the public demands. Democrats are united. We like to see the same thing. And I'd like to see a vote to actually have Hunter Biden actually, with unanimous consent, do actually a hearing and address us today, if possible.
Today we are focusing on the discriminatory and racist practices in home appraisals in our country. But we also know that many Black families and communities are disproportionately facing foreclosure now that pandemic foreclosure moratoriums have ended and mortgage servicers are beginning to ramp up back to full capacity. Madam Chair, I ask for unanimous consent to submit to the congressional record the city article highlighting New York City's Black neighborhoods facing a foreclosure crisis.
Without objection, such is the order.
In New York City, we are starting to see that the majority Black zip codes had an average of 8.48% of homeowners who had fallen behind on their payments for more than 30 days. That percentage is 4 times that of the majority white zip code average and 1.5 times that of the majority Hispanic zip code average from September. Ms. Rice, data suggests that in the city's Black neighborhoods, in New York City's Black neighborhoods, which were devastated by the economic shocks and the pandemic, as well as decades of predatory lending, are most at risk of foreclosure. Is this consistent with what you've observed?
Yes.
We also know that most of the Black neighborhoods with high concentrations of struggling homeowners are in Southeast Queens and in many parts of the Bronx, areas that lenders had previously targeted with subprime loans in the run-up to the 2008 financial crisis. Ms. Rice, we know that none of these financial institutions ever really paid a true cost for the financial crisis that they precipitated, especially not for the kinds of financial discrimination that Black homeowners faced and continue to face. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yes, it is.
In your opinion, at the very least in the short term, should loan servicers provide loan modifications in order to make residents' monthly payments more doable to avoid foreclosure?
Yes.
So what we're seeing here is a history and a blatant pattern. We have the pandemic and the way that banks had serviced their mortgages and loans during the pandemic. You also have that compounding on the injustices and one of the greatest wealth transfers out of the Black community in the entire United States during the 2008 financial crisis. But what we're also seeing is that when faced with the possibility of foreclosure, residents are more likely to sell their homes out of desperation, only to then be faced with discrimination in the appraisal value of their home when they're trying to get out of it. Ms. Rice, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics found that of the roughly 80,000 appraisers in the United States, 97.7% identify as white, correct?
That is correct.
And we also know that across all majority Black neighborhoods, owner-occupied homes are undervalued by $48,000 per home on average, amounting to $156 billion in cumulative losses to Black wealth, correct?
That is correct, as per the Brookings Institution.
This is a scandal. This is shocking. And it should truly be an affront to every single person in this country that believes in any form of financial, social, and economic equity. In fact, a study by the Brookings Institute found that on average, homes in neighborhoods where the share of the population is 50% Black are valued at roughly half the price as homes in neighborhoods with no Black residents. We must do better. And it is just laid bare the legacy from redlining to the way that has transformed into and accumulated and built into the eventual 2008 subprime loan crisis, because it was Black and brown and low-income communities that were especially targeted with subprime loans. And then for the pandemic foreclosure rates to be higher. Ms. Rice, do you have any advice for us as members of Congress, or even the general American public, and what we should be doing in order to right this wrong?
Sure, and I see the time is running out, so I'll just say briefly, adopt the recommendations in the PAVE action plan, implement those actions. And we also have a bevy of recommendations that we put forth in our analysis and study of the appraisal industry that I also would recommend being put in place.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So while I was not deeply hurt or offended by little comments that are made, when I was reflecting on this, I honestly thought that I was just going to pack it up and go home. It's just another day, right? But then yesterday, Representative Yoho decided to come to the floor of the House of Representatives and make excuses for his behavior. And that I could not let go. I could not allow my nieces, I could not allow the little girls that I go home to, I could not allow victims of verbal abuse and worse to see that excuse, and to see our Congress accept it as legitimate and accept it as an apology, and to accept silence as a form of acceptance. I could not allow that to stand, which is why I am rising today to raise this point of personal privilege.
I rise today to again strike funding out of the National Defense Authorization Act. The National Defense Authorization Act is an important funding bill for the United States of America, not for any other country. And the American people are fed up and tired of the hard-earned tax dollars that they pay to our government being spent in foreign lands and foreign countries for foreign causes and foreign people. To be against funding for war is not pro-Russia, it's pro-America and pro-Americans and pro our own American border. I'd like to talk about this feasibility study for creating a center of excellence in Ukraine, by reminding the House today that there are approximately 40,000 homeless veterans in America today. These are men and women who served our country, served to defend our national security, but yet they are living homeless on the streets. Our National Defense Authorization Act should only fund the Department of Defense for the defense of our country. And again, I'll state the mission statement as stated on the Department of Defense website. The mission stands to deter war and to protect our nation's national security. By engaging in paying for a feasibility study of creating a center of excellence in Ukraine, that does not deter war, nor does that protect our national security interest. But I would like to talk about the people that we should care about, the people we should be spending our American tax dollars for. One of them is a man named Mike Reynolds. Mike lives in my district, and Mike is a veteran that served our country. Mike has a brain injury that he sustained serving the United States of America in our military. Mike did not get help from Veteran Affairs. Mike is not receiving help from a feasibility study in the Department of Defense funding and the NDAA. Mike had to establish his own way of helping himself by creating a very important, incredible organization to help other veterans who also don't receive help. It's called Hero Ag. You see, Mike is a farmer, and he learned to become a farmer because he found that farming was a way that he could heal not only his brain, but he could also heal the pain inside of him that he sustained from serving and fighting in another foreign war, not America's war. What Mike does now is he spends his time rehabbing other veterans who are also injured in all kinds of ways, some of them not visible from our own eyes because their injuries inside their brains. Mike is a great American, and I'm so proud that he lives in my district, and I'm honored and always grateful to visit his farm and do anything I can to help Hero Ag and help the veterans that go there. But our National Defense Authorization Act should be funding for our Department of Defense for our nation's military. And that doesn't have anything to do with another nation. There's a lot of talk in the House today coming from both sides of the aisle, talking about what the NDAA is for. But too much of the time, I'm hearing it talk about a war in Ukraine. And again, I'll remind everyone here, the Ukraine is not the 51st state. Ukraine is another country and another land. And American lives are not being risked. They are not being killed in Ukraine because Ukraine, again, is not part of the United States of America. But our tax dollars come from America. They come from hardworking Americans. And they very much want their money only to be spent for the defense of our border, of our states, and of our national security interest. This is a feasibility study that should not be in our NDAA. This should be in a separate funding bill. Again, just like $300 million going to Ukraine should be in a separate funding bill because it doesn't make sense for the NDAA, this feasibility study for creating a center of excellence in Ukraine should be in a separate funding bill, and that would be the important way to handle it. Now, I'll ask the House today, is it our job to be the world's police? Is it our job to create feasibility studies on how to help injured people all over the world? Because while the NDAA has a proposed center of excellence for Ukraine, the NDAA does not have a proposed center of excellence for countries in Africa that have civil wars going on, where there are people there that are dealing with amputations or brain injuries. This doesn't have a feasibility study to help any other country but Ukraine. And again, I'll reiterate, Ukraine is not the United States of America. I reserve my time.
Thank you. Right. For what purpose does the gentleman from Connecticut seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On January 21st, 2021, I introduced articles of impeachment against Joe Biden. And less than 2 weeks later, I was kicked off all of my committees by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. They said it was for Facebook comments and replies and likes, but we all know the truth. It was because my articles of impeachment on Joe Biden were correct. He was indeed abusing his power as Vice President of the United States. Now we have more information to prove that not only was I right then, but it was more damning than we already knew. But I'd like to roll back. President Trump was wrongfully impeached twice, and both of these impeachments must be expunged by the House of Representatives. But what I'd like to talk about is the difference in the type of information we have. The Democrats brought out the Steele dossier. The Steele dossier was written as a Democrat political opposition research paper. The information was written by a contractor, and it was fed to the FBI with no transparency on subsources. The contractor had no primary source information, and the FBI operationalized uncorroborated claims to secure FISA warrant on political campaign official of opposing political party. Information was later debunked by Congress, the Inspector General, and Special Counsel investigations. But the mainstream media won Pulitzer Prizes on the bogus Russia narrative. And then they led the witch hunt, leading to impeaching President Trump over a phone call with the president of Ukraine. But let me tell the House what type of information we actually have. We have an FBI form called an FD 1023 form, and here's the difference for the public listening. On the 1023 form, the information originated from an FBI informant who'd been relied upon for many years and was considered the FBI's top informant. It was also paid $200,000 for multiple years by the FBI. Information was written by the FBI agent in official FBI form and relied on no additional subsources. The FBI informant was a direct eye and ear witness to the information provided. The FBI apparently took no action to further the investigative claim. The FBI has refused to describe any investigative steps to assess the investigative information. Therefore, it has not been debunked, despite White House's lies and false claims. The mainstream media has largely ignored the story or parroted the White House false claim. What does the FD 1023 form tell you? I'll tell you exactly what it says, because not only have I read it, I also have it in my possession right here. And this is a form that the entire American people, the entire public should have because it's unclassified. But Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, forced us to read it in a SCIF and would not hand it over to us. Thankfully, Senator Chuck Grassley released this form because it was provided to him by a brave whistleblower. This form entails the damning information that then Vice President Joe Biden took a $5 million bribe from the oligarch that owns Burisma. Not only did Joe Biden take a $5 million bribe, so did Hunter Biden. And what did Joe Biden deliver as Vice President of the United States? He got Viktor Shokin, the Ukrainian prosecutor general, fired from his job. How did Joe Biden, Vice President, get that done? He threatened to withhold $1 billion of U.S. aid to Ukraine until Viktor Shokin was fired. And you want to know what? He was fired. In 2016, Joe Biden himself bragged to the Foreign Council and told them that he got him fired. He bragged about it. It's on video. But that's not all they've done. Hunter Biden has also gotten his father on the phone over 24 times to talk with his business partners and talk with them about the business that they are doing. And even more so, in our possession, through our investigations on our Republican-led committees, we also have a WhatsApp chat that says, from Hunter Biden, I am sitting here with my father, and we would like to understand why the commitment made has not been fulfilled. Who's his father? Joe Biden. Tell the director that I would like to resolve this now before it gets out of hand, and now means tonight. And it continues on. What I'm demanding is that the Republican-led House of Representatives move forward on an impeachment inquiry on Joe Biden, because this type of corruption should never be allowed to stand. We must expunge President Trump's wrongful impeachments, and we must impeach Joe Biden.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in House Report number 118-158, offered by Ms. Green of Georgia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 614, the gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Green, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to ask the House to support my amendment number 33, which will cut the $73 million increase in funding for the NATO Security Investment Program. This is simply keeping the NATO funding at the same level as last year's appropriations level. I think this is very important. The United States overwhelmingly contributes more than our fair share to NATO for Europe's defense, and it's time for European countries to pay their dues. While our own border is overrun by border crossers and deadly poisonous fentanyl daily, we continue to send hundreds of billions of dollars to NATO to defend Ukraine's democracy, even though they aren't even a NATO member nation. Investing in NATO security is an America Last policy. All increases in funding should be investing in the United States of America's security and the defense of our own border. President Trump was exactly right when he called on European nations to put the required minimum of 2% of their GDP towards NATO defense spending. Most NATO countries still don't meet that requirement, and the U.S. ends up paying for 70% of the alliance's defenses. This is outrageous. The American people do not like paying for other countries' defense when our borders are overrun daily. The current 2023 defense expenditure for NATO countries has the United States at $860 billion. The United States of America's military is not meant to be the world's police. And as we find ourselves funding a war in Ukraine, when the United States position should be pushing for peace, not paying for and not funding war and death of innocent people, we should not increase our spending and increase the amount of funding by $73 million more dollars to the NATO Security Investment Program. Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. Who claims time in opposition?
Mr. Speaker,
for what purpose does the gentleman from Texas
claim time
seek
in opposition.
The gentleman's recognized.
My arguments are the same. NATO's Security Investment Program is NATO's military construction program. The $73 million increase this year is needed to reinvest infrastructure in the region to deter Russian aggression. I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I reserve my time. Sorry. I yield my time. I yield 2 minutes to Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
I thank the gentleman for yielding.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I rise in opposition to this grossly irresponsible amendment. This amendment would take a huge cut, $73 million, from the NATO Security Investment Program during a time when increased funding is essential for long-deferred projects. Cutting funding for the NATO Security Investment Program is not only short-sighted from a national security perspective, but it isn't even sound long-term fiscal policy. These investments ensure a robust American and NATO presence to deter hostile nations and prevent even greater costs to American taxpayers down the road. And one has only to look at the news to understand that we have hostile nations who wish to do us and our allies harm. And a $73 million cut from the NATO Security Investment Program would put us more in jeopardy alongside our allies. The Russian invasion of Ukraine shows that international cooperation and strong alliances are as essential as ever. These projects are not America paying other countries' bills. In fact, America pays a proportionally small amount to the program compared to the size of our economy in relation to the rest of NATO. Regardless of your stance on overall defense spending levels of various NATO countries, it's simply not true that the United States is paying more than its share of this direct contribution program. These projects are agreed upon NATO requirements and oftentimes have a direct benefit to supplement existing U.S. requirements. These sites include ones directly benefiting U.S. forces through the use of upgraded ports, airfields, and communications. Our contributions to NATO represent only a small portion of overall defense spending, but the strength of the alliance is an outsized and irreplaceable part of American national security. This amendment would not even reinvest the funding into other priorities. It simply cuts funding from the bill, shortchanging the military construction portion of the bill by over $73 million. It's irresponsible.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank all of our witnesses here today. This is an extremely important issue, and I think, as my colleague from Massachusetts just described, this is a matter of life and death, and it's been a matter of life and death for our communities back home in New York, for my constituents in particular, especially when it comes to a very specific issue that Ms. Beidavi-Dusai articulated earlier in your opening statement, and I want to thank you for drawing attention to this issue and for being here representing New York taxi workers. I sent a letter along with several of my colleagues from New York on August 1st expressing my concern over their role, over the role of regulators supervising banks and credit unions involved in predatory lending and collection practices that has led many taxi drivers, some of my constituents, to suicide. This, I think, is a matter of financial malpractice and predatory behavior that I think in many ways should be a national scandal. It is literally killing people. To date, we've only received 2 responses from those agencies. Ms. Dusai, in order for a person to own a taxi cab in New York City, you need to own a taxi medallion, correct?
No, in order to operate the car for service, you need a medallion.
Correct. And these medallions are sold on the open market through auctions, where New York City usually sets the opening bid, right?
That's right.
At the last auction in 2014, the city of New York set the opening bid at $800,000 for a taxi driver, correct?
That's right.
And so the price in 2002 was $200,000. It skyrocketed to $800,000 just 12 years later. How did that happen?
Well, there was really a concerted effort between the lenders and then middlemen called taxi brokers and several government agencies. I mean, the city of New York from 2004 to 2014 made $850 million from these auctions. I remember after 9/11, when the economy started to crash, the Bloomberg administration at the time had said they would auction off medallions in order to balance that budget.
Thank you, Ms. Dusai. And I think one of the things that is so important for people to realize is that these are everyday people, most of them immigrants in New York City, trying to start their lives the way and live up to our country's promise. And loans of almost $1 million were given to drivers who are only making sometimes $30,000 a year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I have 3 documents, 3 reports from the New York Times on this scandal. One, as thousands of, and I would like to seek unanimous consent to submit them to the
Without
congressional
objection,
record.
such is the order.
I would also like to submit to the congressional record a document that was provided to us by one of our drivers, Mr. Mohammed Haq.
Without objection.
It shows his actual statement of $1 million loan given to him, and his tax record showed that in 2012 he was only making $22,392 a year. In 2013, $23,269 a year. He was given $1 million loan, making $20,000 a year. And we're supposed to act as though this is his fault. This is criminal behavior. And it has not just happened to Mr. Haq. It has happened to immigrant taxi drivers all over the city of New York. Regulatory agencies knew, the city knew, and these suicides are not just an indirect side effect, they are a direct consequence of the neglect of a vulnerable community in New York City. In fact, we have accounts right here reported by the New York Times. One of the drivers drove in front of City Hall himself, wrote a note on Facebook saying he could not continue to live, and killed himself right in front of City Hall. And we are ignoring this crisis. These taxi drivers need a bailout, because this is not just about predatory collection practices, as I was discussing with my colleague here. This is manufactured, financial, indentured servitude. And it is wrong. We need to bail out these drivers. And I would like to invite my colleagues here on the federal level and our partners on the city level to make sure they get the justice they deserve. Thank you very much.